Russia has been constantly changing its main goals for this war. Many people assume that the main reason for this it is because Russian army hasn't been able to achieve anything significant so far. And that is why setting different goals, usually easier ones, allows them to at least declare some kind of victory. What was the original goal of Russia in this war? Why it has completely failed? What other goals will Russia try to pursue in the nearest future? And these are the questions that we'll be talking about in my today's video. What's up, investors and people of Reddit, it's the Russian Dude, and this is your daily update on Russian-Ukrainian war as of Thursday, May 12th. You can see the main events of the day to my right, along with the timestamps. Today, May 12th, the country of Finland has officially applied to be a part of NATO, which might not sound as something extraordinary, but in fact this is a significant loss for Russia in this war. Because if you remember, one of the main goals of Russia since the beginning of this war was to prevent NATO from expanding its territories. And now we have another country of Finland joining this alliance. In addition to that, Sweden is also planning to apply to join NATO next Monday, May 16th. So now we have not just one, but already two countries allowing the NATO to expand its territories. The response of Russia was obviously immediate, and they said in case Finland indeed decides to join NATO, Russia will consider this action as a direct threat. I don't know threat to who or what, but this is what they said. Specifically, the press secretary of Russia, Dmitry Peskov, mentioned that in case any country decides to intervene in Ukraine or intervene with this special military operation of Russia, the response of Russia will be immediate and hard. Later today, even the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia mentioned that in case Finland and Sweden join NATO, Russia will consider these countries as a legitimate military targets, which in an understanding of Russian government officials probably mean that they will need to be denazified. And then the ex-president of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev, said that this action that NATO takes by sending weapons to Ukraine can trigger a bigger conflict between Russia and NATO. He then also added that the alliance should be extremely careful because of dealing with the country that has nuclear weapons. I mean, that's not the first time Russia was threatening with the nuclear weapons, and I guess it's not gonna be the last one. One of the first responses of the Western countries was the response of the head of the Pentagon, Lloyd Austin, and he said that Russia does not want to have a fight with NATO. What he implied here is that once again Russia is simply bluffing. Basically, how can Russia engage NATO if they are struggling defeating one single country of Ukraine? And in the meantime, it is estimated that NATO has approximately 1.9 million soldiers. And in addition to that, the alliance has much better and more modern weapons. So his message was basically loud and clear. Russia, just don't do it. You're not gonna win here. And by the way, if you like this style of daily news reporting, feel free to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Also, if you're interested in receiving additional content and you wish to support Ukraine with us, please make sure to check the link in the description. Thank you so much, and let's continue. And here, by the way, we have a very interesting infographics that shows which countries were joining NATO at which years. So it all started back in 1949 with the founding countries such as the United States, Canada, the UK, and other major European countries. More recently, in 2017, Montenegro joined the alliance. And then in 2020, North Macedonia also joined the NATO. But to be honest, I haven't heard any statements by Russians to denazify and liberate these countries. It was just until Ukraine showed its intent to join NATO, and suddenly Russia wants to liberate entire Europe from Nazis. And now we have two more countries coming, which I talked about previously, which are Finland and Sweden. So to summarize the failure of Russian army against its war with Ukraine, here is the statement of Alexei Arestovich. And he says that Russia is constantly changing its objectives, trying to make it easier and easier so they can finally announce some kind of victory. And he thinks that Russia will try to reinforce its positions on already occupied territories, such as for example mainly the territory of Lugansk region. And then Alexei Arestovich thinks that these territories will be used as the bargaining chip in negotiations with Ukraine. And then he also added that from Ukrainian side, they see that Russia has only two potential choices. The first one will be peaceful talks, and in this case, yes, Russia will be most likely using occupied territories to bargain with Ukraine. And second, in case Russia decides to proceed with military actions, the only possible future for Russia in this case will be its total defeat. Welcome to another episode of Ridiculous Russian Propaganda, and in this picture we can see a pickup truck which was driven around Moscow. The thing about this pickup truck is that it had a trailer with the coffin on it which had Ukrainian and American flags. So the driver was driving around Moscow for several minutes until the police stopped him. And after just a few questions and routine check of his driving license, he was released. I mean, this happened in the same country where you can get detained if you're just standing with the poster which says no to war. But if you're demonstrating something against Ukraine and USA, I guess that's acceptable. The head of Lugansk region, Leonid Pasechnik, said that he is planning to do a referendum along with his residents to decide whether they want to join Russia or not. And just as a reminder, only a couple of days ago, the head of Donetsk region, Denis Pushilin, also did the same thing. In addition to that, the representatives of Kherson region also asked Putin recently if they can join Russia as well. But wait, there is more. The advisor to the mayor of Mariupol, Pyotr Andriushenko, also said that this region also wants to do a referendum on May 15th to join Russia as well. I mean, if you are a daily viewer of my channel, you already know that the way Russia annexes Ukrainian territories always goes through the same three steps. And briefly, first one is to send infiltrators in the targeted region. The second is to proclaim independence from Ukraine. And third is to do a legitimate referendum to join Russia. So at this very moment, all the regions that I mentioned previously already had their infiltrators. Some of these regions are already proclaimed to be independent from Ukraine, even though basically no one acknowledged it except Russia. And in other regions, such as for example Mariupol, it looks like that Russia is trying to kill every single last Ukrainian Nazi so that they can do a legitimate referendum. As a result, somehow miraculously, we have all these regions that want to become Russian. And at the same time, when I receive videos of regular residents, of regular Ukrainians who live on these territories, most of all you see that they're basically against this. And so yes, at this very moment we have these four regions who allegedly want to join Russia, but if you remember, at the same time, one of the main goals of Russia since the beginning was just to liberate Lugansk and Donetsk. This map of Ukraine shows us the concentration of Russian phones which are connected to Russian networks, which shows us the real picture and location of Russian forces on the territory of Ukraine. On this map presented to us by the Defense Intelligence of the United Kingdom, we can see the current condition of the war as of May 12th. And as always, the main combat actions are concentrated in the east and south of the country. One thing worth mentioning is that the Ukrainian army was able to liberate completely the region of Kharkiv. And in addition to that, some Ukrainian forces crossed the border with Russia and initiated military intervention on Russian territory. Another territory where heavy combat is happening at this very moment is the city of Mariupol. And this is the city where the steel factory Azovstal is located. The city of Mariupol is one of the most destroyed Ukrainian cities, with approximately up to 90% of its entire infrastructure destroyed at this moment. And because of this, many civilians tried to hide in the bomb shelters under this steel factory. For the last couple of weeks, one of the biggest questions was to how to evacuate these civilians. And it has been reported that a couple of days ago, all the civilians were able to be evacuated from the territory of the factory. For this reason, the combat actions between Russians and Ukrainians resumed. And at this very moment, the Azov battalion is under constant siege and bombings by the Russian army. The representative of Azov battalion, Sviatoslav Polomar, says that approximately 600 soldiers are heavily injured. And at this very moment, Ukraine is having negotiations with Russia about evacuating 38 most heavily injured soldiers of Azov battalion in exchange for Russian prisoners of war. The situation on the factory is really bad. The remaining soldiers cannot have proper sleep or proper food, and the conditions are extremely unsanitary. So this very moment, this is the real last stand of this battalion, and entire Ukraine considers them to be real war heroes. The general of the US Army, Ben Hodges, thinks that Ukrainian forces will be able to push Russians away from its territory somewhere by the end of this summer. He says that this is possible because Russia is weakened by the sanctions and they need new soldiers. And in addition to that, Ukraine has been already receiving offensive weapons from Western countries. So if you remember, Ukraine at this very moment is in the stage of accumulating offensive weapons. Which basically means, according to Alexei Arestovich, as soon as they have enough of these weapons, which is going to be somewhere around middle of June, this is when they can start launching counterattacks. The advisor to the president of Ukraine, Alexei Arestovich, said that China finally made up its mind who to support in this war. And according to him, it looks like that China is on the side of Ukraine. He said that the government officials of China had this military briefing where they were told that Ukraine will most likely be able to resist the major attacks of Russians. And because of this, the leaders of China acknowledged that it is very well possible that Ukraine might win in this war, which according to Alexei Arestovich shows that China has selected its side. A couple of days ago, Vladimir Zelensky mentioned that Ukraine has successfully completed the second part of the application for Ukraine to join the European Union. And today, the representatives of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of France mentioned that the Ukrainian candidacy will be reviewed by the leaders of European countries most likely next month in June. And only after this, Ukraine might receive the status of an official applicant, which brings the country one step closer towards joining the European Union. Today, Vladimir Putin had a conference about the economic situation in Russia as well as the relations with Western countries. And here are his main statements. First of all, he said that Russia is doing perfectly fine under all the sanctions. The next thing he mentioned is that the inflation in Russia is also slowing down. To this point, he also added that at this very moment, Russian currency ruble is one of the strongest currencies in the world, which technically is correct because Russian currency was strengthening against US dollar the most since the beginning of this year. But you also cannot forget that the reason why Russian currency was doing so good, it is because of these artificial interventions from the Central Bank of Russia, which is assumed that are not sustainable in long-term perspective. The next thing Putin was talking about is that most countries will be facing hunger in the nearest future. And the reason for this is because of greed and stupid decisions of leaders of Western countries against Russia. I mean, Russia and Ukraine is one of the biggest exporters of wheat, I'm gonna take this. But I'm not entirely sure why he thinks that the rest of the world will be starving just because Russia will stop sending so much bread to international countries. And then he concluded by saying that the sanctions against Russia will trigger world economic crisis in the nearest future. Thank you so much for your attention, check the link in the description, stay safe and see you tomorrow.